double fertilization. First of all, we have to discuss about what is double fertilization. Double fertilization is the process in which two male gametes utilize. One male gamete fuse with haploid female gamete and form zygote. On the other hand, another male gamete fuses with polar nuclei or secondary nucleus to form primary endosperm nucleus, known as double fertilization. Double fertilization is the characteristic features of angiosperm. Let us discuss how this mechanism or the process occur in the angiospermic plant. During the pollination, the pollen grain are deposited on the stigma. After the deposition of pollen grain on the stigma during the pollination, this pollen grain absorbs the nutrient from the stigma and water from the stigma. Due to that, pollen grain swell up, and from the germ pore, the intine come out and acts as a pollen tube, and this pollen tube formation, it is known as the pollen grain germination on the stigma of the carpel. Thus, pollen tube formation takes place. This pollen tube meanwhile produces the two male gametes from the generative cell. Here, one another cell also present, that is tube cell. Thus, in the pollen tube, there are two non-motile male gametes are present and tube cell also present. Later on, this tube cell degenerates. Thus, this is the formation of pollen tube. Now, this pollen tube from the stigma after germination enter through the stigma hollow style and then ovary chamber and finally enter in the ovule. Thus, the growth of pollen tube takes place through this style up to the ovule. This growth, it is takes place due to the chemical produced by synergids, which is present in a embryo sac. Now then, this entry of pollen tube in the ovary chamber and finally in the ovule takes place in a three-way. Usually, the entry of pollen tube takes place through the micropyle of the ovule. Now, this entry of pollen tube which takes place through the micropyle known as the porogamy. Then, in some plant, entry of the pollen tube takes place through the chalaza. Process is known as the chalazogamy. Then, in some plant also, the entry of the pollen tube takes place through the integuments. Process is known as the mesogamy. Now look at again, I repeat, when pollen tube enter through the micropyle of the ovule known as porogamy. When pollen tube enter through the chalaza of the ovule, then known as the chalazogamy. Or when pollen tube enter through the integument known as mesogamy. So this is the way of the entry of pollen tube which occur in the angiospermic plant. But usually entry of the pollen tube takes place through the mesogamy. Now, as we know, In the pollen tube, two non-motile male gametes is produced. These two non-motile male gametes transported up to the ovule or the embryo sac of the ovule with the help of the pollen tube known as the siphonogamy, because the both male gametes are non-motile, and that is why they are transported with the help of the pollen tube up to the embryo sac, up to the female gametes. Thus, process is known as the siphonogamy. Now, when the pollen tube enter in the ovule through the micropyle, during that time the tip of the pollen tube absorb the water from the synergids, and due to that this tip of the pollen tube burst, and the content present inside the pollen tube, that is enter into the embryo sac. Content consists of obviously two non-motile male gametes. After the entry of that two non-motile male gametes in the embryo sac, the one male gamete fuse with the haploid female gametes, that is eggs, and form the zygote. Process is known as the syngamy. Whereas at the same time another male gamete fuses with the secondary nucleus, which is the diploid or the polar nuclei, and here produce the triploid primary endosperm nucleus. Process is known as the triple fusion. Thus, here two events takes place, that is syngamy and triple fusion. On the two place, fertilization takes place in the embryo sac. That's why such a fertilization is known as the double fertilization. Let us discuss this two type of fertilization. What is syngamy? Syngamy it is the first fertilization where haploid male gametes fuse with the haploid female gametes, that is eggs. Male gamete and fuse with the haploid female gamete and form diploid zygote. This diploid zygote, after fertilization, develop the embryo. So this is the syngamy. It is also known as the fertilization number 1. On the other hand, at the same time, another fertilization takes place, that is known as triple fusion. In the triple fusion, the haploid male gamete fuse with polar nuclei, which is the already diploid. This is the diploid secondary nucleus or the polar nuclei, and form the triploid, 3N triploid primary endosperm nucleus, primary endosperm nucleus, which after fertilization develop into the nutritive endosperm. So this is all about the double fertilization which takes place in the angiosperm, and it is a characteristic features of the angiospermic plant. This whole process discovered by scientist Noasin in the liliaceous plant, for example lilium or fritillaris. So this is the all about their double fertilization. Then significance of double fertilization. The first significance of double fertilization is the unique characteristic features of angiosperm. Then second significance is double fertilization ensures if eggs is fertilized, then only seed is formed. Then third is here zygote, which is the result of the syngamy, develop into the embryo after fertilization. Then primary endosperm nucleus, that is triploid, forms a nutritive endosperm after fertilization, and primary endosperm nucleus is the result of the triple fusion. Then thus next one is double fertilization restore diploid condition of the angiospermic plant with the help of the process syngamy. So it maintains the diploid condition of the plant. And last significance is here double fertilization avoids the polyembryony. Polyembryony is prevented by the double fertilization. Thus this is all about the double fertilization and significance of the double fertilization. Thank you.